They say the last emperor of Rome died a eunuch at 15, castrated, then strangled with a silk cord. Is that true, or a legend stitched together from blood and whispers? Tonight, we're going to take a quiet walk through the corridors where empires end. We'll trace a viral claim, the last emperor of Rome who was castrated and strangled at 15, and test it against the record. We'll meet pale boys with heavy crowns, a teenager whose name closed the book on the Western Empire, a child in Constantinople strangled behind a curtain, and others mutilated not for crimes, but for being alive at the wrong moment. You'll hear the sound of doors closing softly, decisively, and feel how rumors are born, how they harden, and how they sometimes misplace a body. By the end, you'll know which part of the headline is true, which part is borrowed from other tragedies, and which part is pure invention. And perhaps why we want it to be true in the first place. We should start with a careful breath. Not all Rome is the same Rome, and not all emperor means the same emperor. The simplicity of the phrase, last emperor of Rome, hides a tangle of history that stretches across centuries and across seas. When people say last emperor of Rome, most are imagining the western half of the Roman Empire, the part with marble forums and Latin speeches, the part of the map that shows Rome, Ravenna, Milan. That story ends in the year 476. The boy on the last page is called Romulus, nicknamed Augustulus, Little Augustus. It sounds like a joke a tired empire told about itself. A child named for the city's legendary founder and its first emperor, placed on a throne that was, by then, almost cardboard. He was propped up by his father Orestes, a general playing at politics. The barbarians at the gates weren't always enemies. Sometimes they were the gatekeepers. But in another way, Rome doesn't end in 476. To the people who lived in Constantinople, an ocean of gold and tile, they were still Romans. They called themselves Romai, Romans, right up until the Ottoman guns cracked their walls in 1453. The title of their ruler, Basilius ton Romaean, translates to Emperor of the Romans. They copied laws, minted coins, prayed in Greek, but claimed a Roman soul. If you mean the last emperor calling himself Roman, then the name is Constantine XI. He died not as a eunuch behind silk curtains, but armored and unrecognizable in a crush of bodies on the city walls. So which last do you mean? The last boy, Romulus, in the West. The last legitimate Western emperor recognized by the East, Julius Nepos. Or the last Roman emperor of any kind, Constantine Palaiologos? Each has a different death. None of those deaths match the headline you've heard. Not perfectly. That mismatch matters because it tells us we're dealing with a braid. One strand from Ravenna, one from Constantinople, one from rumor, and a final strand, castration, borrowed from a general practice of power. We're going to unbraid this slowly. Feel how the strands pull apart. Feel how the rope weakens, and watch what falls away. Here's our question as we step into the next room. If the last Western emperor wasn't castrated or strangled, where did those details come from? Imagine a teenager in a trimmed cloak, trying not to look frightened. Romulus Augustulus looked onto a world where the palaces no longer hummed with power, but echoed with it. He sat, not in Rome, but in Ravenna, foggy canals, whispering pines, and a court that felt like a stage set still standing after the place shuts down. He wasn't the choice of the Senate and not of the Eastern Court. He was the choice of his father, Orestes, a man of energy and ambition who thought he could balance the soldiers' demands and keep his hands on the levers. It did not last. The Federati, federate troops settled in Italy, asked for land. Orestes refused. Their leader, Odoacer, a commander with a hard profile and a patient voice, was done asking. In 476, he defeated Orestes in battle, killed him, and walked up to Ravenna. There are moments history loves to dramatize, door kicks, breaking glass. But this was more like careful housekeeping. Odoacer did not slaughter the Senate. He did not burn the city. He turned to the boy on the throne and saw that the throne was a prop. What he did next is the part that refuses to match the headline. He did not castrate Romulus. He did not strangle him with a bowstring or a scarf. He deposed him ceremonially and sent the Western imperial regalia, purple and diadem, to the Eastern Emperor Zeno in Constantinople with a tidy note. We don't need two emperors anymore. Zeno was no happier for the favor, but he accepted it. The West formally was folded into the East. And the boy? He was sent into comfortable exile. According to a near contemporary source, he received a pension of 6,000 solidi and a villa on the Bay of Naples, the old Lucullanum with its gardens spilling into the sea. That's not a grisly end. There's no silk cord, no atrocity. Romulus Augustulus's fate is the kind of anticlimax that reality prefers. Some say he lived for decades, faded into a pious obscurity. We do not know how he died. He disappears into the sunlight, a young man turned into absence. So the Western last emperor didn't die a eunuch, and he wasn't strangled. But the idea of a boy in danger doesn't leave you, does it? It shouldn't. The West's last Roman boy, spared. Somewhere else, another boy wasn't. We need to cross the water and walk into a different palace. The method we're looking for, quiet, choking, bloodless, has a rhythm in Constantinople. The bowstring is waiting in the East. This is where the breath slows. If you want the strangle cord, you go to Byzantium. The palace in Constantinople was a machine that ran on rituals. Doors, bows, banquets, secrets. It was a world that could seem delicate at the surface, but look at the hinges, they're iron. Blood was not to be shed publicly. So when emperors fell, they went to a monastery or died of a sudden illness, or when the edict required, they were strangled out of sight, often with a bowstring. Bloodless death, technically. There was still bruising, still struggle. Just no stain on the carpets. Alexios II Komnenos, the son of Manuel I, came to the throne as a child in 1180. He was maybe 11. Think of a small figure in purple boots, led by the hand into rooms he didn't understand. His regent was his mother, Maria of Antioch, Latin by birth, and that detail mattered. A poisonous little seed in a city suspicious of foreigners. The regency was unpopular. Factions formed. Out in the city, rumors boiled. Within 3 years, the roiling displaced the throne. Enter Andronikos I Komnenos, a cousin who walked like a panther and made speeches like a savior. He promised to cleanse corruption, to protect the empire from Latin influence, to bring justice. Crowds cheered him. He smiled with his mouth and not his eyes. He raised the flag of reform and rode it straight into tyranny. Some sources say the young emperor was compelled to sign his own mother's death warrant, a detail so cruel that even now it closes the throat. Andronikos married Alexios' child bride, Agnes of France, himself. He took the title co-emperor, pushed Alexios into the shadow. The boy had no power. In 1183, he had no life either. The end is described by Nicetas Choniates, the great Byzantine historian whose prose could cut glass. The boy is led into a room where the light falls thin, perhaps a private chamber with tapestries bunched in the corners. The men enter, not loud, just efficient. The instrument is a bowstring. It is silent. It is clean. It is routine. The boy is strangled. He is 14, perhaps 15 by some count. And that number, 15, rings like a chime. Was he castrated? No reliable source says so. His killer was not interested in sterilizing a bloodline. He was eliminating a body whose very heartbeat threatened him. Andronikos used the strangler's cord because it was the imperial way. He needed Alexios dead, and he needed the city to keep its veneer. So here we find it, a boy emperor strangled with cord, at roughly 15. But he is not a last emperor of Rome. He is an emperor of the Romans in Byzantium who lived 2.5 centuries before the final fall. He is not a last anything, except the last breath counted by two men concentrating on their grip. It's a scene your mind wants to hold on to. It is human and awful and quiet. It slides under your skin. You can almost hear the fabric twist, feel the shallow air. It is in painful miniature, a portrait of what power does when it has decided on you. We're closer to the rumor now. We have the age. We have the cord. One word remains to explain: castration. Where does that enter the story? Let's step away from the cord and look at the knife. In Byzantium, the knife often pointed not to the neck but lower. It has its reasons. The knife kept you from the throne. In human terms, castration is a horror. In political terms, it was a tool, a cruel, effective tool, to remove a competitor without killing him. In Roman and Byzantine law and custom, a mutilated body was disqualified from rule. A eunuch could be an administrator, a general, even a regent, but not emperor. Castrate the claimant, and you cut the line. That logic sat at the heart of many palace decisions. It shadowed boys who wore purple. It fell on their cousins, their half-brothers, and sometimes, horrifyingly, their sons. Some examples are clear. In the 7th century, after a tumultuous few months in 641, the boy emperor Heraclonas, about 15 or 16, was deposed amid charges. How much was rumor? How much justice? That he and his mother Martina had poisoned his half-brother Constantine III. The city turned. The Senate demanded a change. The punishment? Mutilation. His nose was slit, his tongue either cut or damaged. He was exiled to Rhodes. Some sources say it included castration, a claim not universally accepted, but murmured in enough chronicles to chill the imagination. We do not have documents of a strangling death. We have a young life, pushed into isolation and darkness, a throne taken away by surgery. Move forward. In 1261, after the Pale Empire in exile at Nicaea marched back into Constantinople and reclaimed the city from the Latin occupiers, a child wore a crown again. John IV Lascaris, 11 years old, became inconvenient to a man with a better army and a stronger name, Michael VIII Palaiologos. The child was the legitimate emperor of Nicaea. Michael was the man who would be emperor of everything. Their collision was inevitable. In December 1261, on the boy's birthday, John was blinded. Some sources say he was also castrated and tonsured into a monk's life, a triple death without killing. Others are careful and record only the blinding. All agree on the motive: to remove forever the possibility of claim. The man who would be remembered as the restorer of Constantinople began his reign with a boy's ruined eyes. There are more shadows. Michael V. Caliphates, the Cocker, raised to the throne in 1041 and unseated within a year, was seized by a mob, dragged before Empress Zoe and her sister Theodora, and punished. The chroniclers agree on the blinding. Some add castration to the list of humiliations inflicted before he was shoved into a monastery. It was a language of power. You don't belong here. You will never belong here again. And during the Comnenian century, as turnings and countermarches tied families into knots, boys poised to be future emperors could find themselves suddenly unmade. The co-emperor Constantine Doukas, crowned in infancy under Michael VII and cherished by his mother Maria of Alania, was sidelined after Alexios I Komnenos took power. He was not, as far as secure records go, castrated. Rather, he was eased into monastic life, a softer exclusion. But the threat lived over such boys like weather. Everyone in the palace knew exactly how the knife could be used. Even earlier, in Rome itself, the idea of castration stalked a different kind of story. Nero took a boy named Sporus and had him castrated to make him a bride, a grotesque parody that Roman writers relished in their hatred. That's not a tale of princes. It's a tale of a private cruelty made public. But it has a way of contaminating memory. Say Rome, say boy, say castration, and Sporus rises along with the emperors and the senators and the soldiers. The point is the atmosphere. In the world of emperors, castration was a known response, a punctuation mark. If you felt generous, you sent the rival to a monastery. If you felt thorough, you bled away his future and made it impossible for him to return with heirs. You could even keep him as a courtier, a reminder of mercy. So when a modern headline says, confidently, last emperor of Rome castrated and strangled at 15, it's a sentence built out of familiar pieces. It takes a boy from the West who was the last, a method from the East that killed boys quietly, and a punishment, castration, that was real enough to feel inevitable. What's missing is the detail that binds them all to the same person. It's not there, not in the sources, not in the careful histories. In the next section, we'll watch the braid being made. We'll see exactly how your memory got tricked, a title here, a rumor there, the gravity of a number, until you swear you knew a face that never existed. The rope was woven out of true threads. The knot was tied incorrectly. Stories like a travel light. A story that takes 4 minutes to explain dies. A story that takes 10 words to repeat lives forever. The internet did not invent this. Medieval chroniclers were the original algorithm. They compressed. They smoothed. They loved types. The good ruler, the tyrant, the boy destroyed by envy, the saint who survives the test. Centuries later, we repeat their shortcuts without realizing we've done so. Here's one pathway for our rumor. Start with the phrase, the last emperor of the West, and the image of a boy. That's Romulus Augustulus, deposed in 476. He was probably about 15. The number fits. It feels right. He closes the door on a 1,000-year story. You can see the outline, last boy 15. If you stop there, the story is clean and wrong about the death. But stop, no one does. Then pick up a detail with more bite. In Constantinople, nearly 300 years after Romulus, a boy emperor named Alexios II is strangled with a bowstring by a man who promised to save the city. Coniates tells it like a legal sentence. Your mind replays it like a nightmare. The strangled with a bowstring detail is almost irresistible. It's short, it's vivid, it's strangely elegant and vicious, the way many Byzantine rituals seem to us. So now your mind is holding these two things together. Boy 15, strangled with a bowstring. Castration sneaks in from another lane. You read a historical aside that rivals were often castrated to prevent dynastic claims, and perhaps you catch a line that John IV Lascaris was blinded, and some say castrated at 11, or that Michael V may have been castrated after blinding. You nod. You file it. You don't note the names. The brain isn't built to keep them all straight, especially with names that echo each other. Instead, it remembers the act. It merges the logic with the boy. It writes itself a single memory. Last emperor. Boy. Castrated. Strangled. If you work for a modern channel hungry for clicks, you tighten the phrase even more. The last emperor of Rome was castrated and strangled at 15. You can see the thumbnail already, a pale face, a cord at the neck, Latin letters flaring behind. But you have only an hour to make the video and you don't have a text. So you glide from Romulus into Alexios and back out through a general note about eunuchs in Byzantium, and you never stop to label the cuts. Your audience doesn't mind. They feel, correctly, that empires end with children undone. The detail is plausible. Plausible feels like truth. Everyone nods. History sighs. Sometimes the braid is tied more deliberately. A storyteller knows the parts don't belong together, but the combination sings. It's the narrative version of forgery with real antique paper. You can even add footnotes in the margins, some sources say. But most of the time, this rumor wasn't malice. It was hunger for a shape. The boy emperor strangled by bowstring was not last, but he's more dramatic than a boy sent to a seaside villa. The cut that disqualifies is more final than an exile. Put them together, and you get a story you'll tell your friends. This is what the ethical historian does, not to kill the drama, but to assign it to the right names. Romulus Augustulus, last in the West, treated with unexpected kindness by a barbarian king. Alexios II, strangled with a bowstring in a palace that smelled of beeswax and lemons, while the city congratulated itself on having found a strong hand. John IV Lascaris, a child blinded and, some say, castrated, pushed into an abbey with his life permanently dimmed. Heraclonas, dragged off the throne, crippled to remove claim. All of this happened. None of it happened to the same boy. And so the rumor is not entirely false in spirit. Empires do terrible things to children, but it is false in the particulars we are asked to believe. If you want to honor those children, you give them back their names. We have one last step. If the last emperor in the West died quietly, and the real last emperor in the East died in battle, maybe the word last itself is our problem. Maybe we should end by letting the final emperor stand. This ending is neither silk nor knife. It's a man with a sword, and a boy who walked away from a throne intact. There are two clean answers to who was the last emperor of Rome, both correct within their own frames. If you're asking about the Western Roman Empire, the last man to assert direct rule in Italy from the old Roman throne was Romulus Augustulus. He was very young, around 15, but he was a pawn. When Odoacer came, he did not cut the boy or bind him. He cut the bureaucracy and sent the insignia back to Constantinople. Romulus walked down from the stage and into daylight, becoming a citizen again. The curtain fell without a scream. The empire had been ending for a long time. It made sense that the final noise was a soft thud. If you're asking about legitimacy, the last legitimate Western emperor recognized by the Eastern court was not Romulus, but Julius Nepos. He was pushed out of Italy, ruled from Dalmatia as a sword without a hand, and was murdered in 480. He was not 15. He was not strangled. He died like many men in antique politics, stabbed by those who found him inconvenient. And if you are asking about the Roman Empire in its Eastern form, the empire that insisted fiercely for 1,000 years that it was Rome on the Bosporus, then the last emperor of Rome was Constantine 11 Palaiologos. There are many stories about his last moments. This is the one that most feel at home in. On May 29th, 1453, when the Ottomans finally broke through the great chain of the city, Constantine put off the trappings of the court, confessed his sins, mounted his horse, and rode into the breaking point at the gate of St. Romanus. He fought. He was neither castrated nor strangled. He was cut down in the crush, the purple boots trampled into the mud. His body was recognized, some say, by the imperial eagle embroidered on his footwear. Others say not at all. He vanished into legend as a warrior, not a victim in a hidden room. The difference matters. It is the difference between ending and unraveling, between assassination in a private chamber and extinction at the walls. It tells you what each end felt like for the people who lived it. If you want an ending in a chamber, the silk cuts off the air, the body goes limp, the door closes. Alexios II Komnenos is your true story. He is not a last, but he is the boy at 15 who was strangled by order of an emperor who wanted the throne to be one voice only. He is the fever dream that walks through the rumor. He is the footnote we turn into a headline. And the castration? It goes everywhere and nowhere. It is a policy, a habit, a threat that forms a backdrop to centuries of intrigue. Some sources say Heraclonas was castrated when he was deposed. Some say John IV Lascaris suffered that fate in addition to blinding. Michael V's ruin sometimes includes it. But none of these cases are lasts, and none of them include strangulation at 15. If we care about truth, and not just about the shock that keeps a finger hovering over then we need to let each of these people keep their specific pain. Not to wash it away, but to name it properly. It is the least we can do for children we can no longer help. So the headline unravels. But the threads, if you follow them to the end, tell you more than the rumor ever did. What, then, happened to the last emperor of Rome who was castrated and strangled at 15? Nothing. He never lived. He is a shadow cast by 3 real boys. Romulus Augustulus, the last Western emperor, spared and pensioned. Alexios II Komnenos, a teenager strangled behind the curtains by an emperor who called himself reformer. And John IV Lascaris, a child emperor whose world went dark, and who some say was mutilated further to make sure he never returned. Some sources say, and some sources are wrong, but they are wrong in human ways. They compress to be understood. They combine to move you. They add cruelty to make a point about power. For those living with the consequences, it would all have seemed the same. A palace that promised protection and delivered punishment. A city that wore sanctity like a cloak and used it to strangle. Reality is messier, harder to remember and easier to forgive. But it leaves names behind. So remember the names. Remember the boy in Naples who survived the end of Rome and lived long enough to forget what a diadem feels like. Remember the boy in Constantinople who did not have that time. Remember the boys to whom the knife was a sentence, not a punishment, because their existence threatened a family's future. If that moved you, and if you want more history told quietly, with the drama left in, but with the names correct, subscribe, share this with a friend who loves the past, and tell me in the comments which rumor you want to unbraid next. The truth, when you speak it softly, is loud enough.